Hi, I'm Curious Cass, and this is Curiosity Junkie. Today's guest is an author, a domestic adoptee, and an identical twin. She writes extensively about finding out who you are, where you belong, and making sense of it. Her debut award-winning memoir, Twice a Daughter, A Search for Identity, Family, and Belonging, came out in May 2021. It is the story of her 5-year search for birth relatives. She has a weekly blog, That Girl, This Life, and a monthly column at The Beecher that focuses on identity, family, and life's quirky moments. Her new book, Belonging Matters, Conversations on Adoption, Family, and Kinship, is out now. Please welcome Julie McGue to the podcast.
Hi, Julie. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning where you are, but good afternoon where I am.
Yes, let's jump in. You've got several books out, and the one I just read is Belonging Matters. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but and your adoption process. But I want to dive in first with, what was it like growing up in your family?
Oh my gosh, that's such a perfect question because it leads into both books, Twice a Daughter and Belonging Matters. So my twin sister and I were adopted together at 3 weeks old. My parents had some infertility issues. And then 2 years later, they adopted a little boy, also through Catholic charities like us. We're not biologically related to him. And then, like so often happens, they had 3 biological kids. So I grew up in this big Irish Catholic crazy family that was blended, never had a sense that our parents were playing any preferences to the biological kids over the adopted kids. Everybody had the same punishments and allowances and all of those things. It was fun. It was crazy. Yeah. And so my sister and I shared a room, and, we would often say, who do you think our birth parents were, and what do you think they were like? And I came to find out much later in life that other adoptees have those same fantasies where, we wonder who our birth parents were. And so my sister and I had developed this fantasy that our parents were probably high school athletes, that, maybe he was the quarterback, she was the cheerleader, whatever, and that they got romantically involved and wanted to go to college, and they were just too young to be parents. So that was our story. We liked that story.
Love that story, yes.
It appeased us. Later in life, when I started my adoption search, when I was 48, I was sent for a breast biopsy, and that sort of opened up the whole big question. You need your medical history to kind of figure out I had 4 kids, so what their history is, but also what my outlook looked like. Yeah, and then that's how I found out that my sisters and my fantasy couldn't have been more far off.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about the connection you have with your twin sister,
Sure.
Because I know that's a special bond. My sister and I are friends with a set of twins, and it's just a completely different kind of connection. They pretty much feel like they can speak to each other without words. Do you find that true for you and your sister?
Oh, absolutely. My mom said when we were infants and toddlers in our cribs that we would have this little jibber jabber conversation across the room with one another. And then certainly as we got older, we just intuit what the other twin is thinking. And sometimes it's just a little nod of the head. It's, all this nonverbal communication. For us, the fact that, we didn't know we were identical twins until DNA analysis about 15 years ago. We were told we were fraternal twins, which is a whole different ballgame. You don't expect to be exactly alike when you're fraternal, but we really are crazy similar. We show up, even now, at 65, we'll show up with the same pants on and the same shoes. without ever having spoken to one another. But what's interesting about being a twin and being adopted is, so much of adoptees' longing is to know who you look like, know
Mm,
who you act like, who you resemble. And I had the luxury of that. I knew that I looked like her, that we were so similar. And there was, I like to say, it takes the jagged edges off of being an adoptee by having a full sibling to grow up with. But we still had a lot of the same concerns that adoptees share. And
yes.
she was very right by my side when I had that breast biopsy at 48. She was completely healthy. It was my health concern, but she and I decided together that we would go down this path of adoption search, and not knowing that we would reunite with anybody, but just to get this medical history that we would both benefit, and that our children would benefit from having too.
So in the book, you kind of mention, and maybe it's in both books, but I did read that your parents were very open with you and your sister about the adoption, and had conversations with you on a regular basis around it, and if you ever wanted to search. And I'm curious, having those conversations, did it make it? Because I think adoption would be a struggle because we're all searching for belonging, right? Like we all want to belong to a group, to a family, and even within families where children are biologically yours, there
Yes.
still can be divorce and abandonment. And I found as I was going through your book, I was connecting with that belonging piece and the possible abandonment feelings because I come from a divorce, situation. And I was just like, isn't that interesting how even though this is about adoption and that process and how you felt going through it, it also is very relatable to anyone and those that may come from divorced families. And
Yes.
yeah, I just wondered how did that make you feel having that open conversation? Because I think I know people that have adopted children, and I always think, what is that like for the child? We have no idea. And is it better to be open, or is it better to just not talk about it? Or how did you feel about that?
Well, I appreciated my parents' conversation. They did that periodically around our birthday, reiterating how much they loved us and how much they wanted us. And we felt that. It was without a doubt. It was the era of the bigger family you can have, the better off you were. So we felt that, and it felt genuine. We also had the sense, though, that my mom might not react too well to that. And when you're a kid, and back to your belonging and attachment uh, questions, you don't want to threaten it. You don't know if, as a kid, if I act like I'm unhappy, does that mean they're going to give us back and we'll get another new set of parents? So there's all of those things kind of percolating, not settling, but that's in the back of your mind. And certainly perfectionism comes into play with adoptees. You want to be the best kid possible. A lot of
Me.
adoptees. Yeah. So that you're well loved, you're well respected, and you have a place in your family. Certainly there's the angry adoptee, though, that are they've internalized this anger about the abandonment that they act out. And my brother was a lot like that, the one that was 2 years younger than us. He was constantly needling my mom. And I think he really just had a lot of questions he wasn't able to verbalize, and he was an angry kid. But the abandonment is a big piece. While we didn't really acknowledge that we felt abandoned, we did. And nowadays, with open adoption, I was adopted through closed adoption, there is information passed on to adoptees based on the conversation with the adoptive parent and birth parent. So they have an idea why adoption was the plan made for them. We had no idea, hence the fantasies of making up these things. There's been a lot of books written about adoption, and that it is a trauma. It is a trauma from the very beginning, this primal wound, because you've been attached to a mother, literally attached, and then that attachment is severed. So adoption is traumatic, whether, the child internalizes that, maybe it causes health issues. You and I exchanged information about that. There is some way of manifesting the loss. And then for those of us that decide we want to connect in some way to our first families, there can be secondary loss because there's more rejection if they do not want that contact. In my first book, Twice a Daughter, it's the memoir of what happened after this breast biopsy and trying to connect to my birth parents to get my medical history. And there was secondary rejection on both of their parts. One ended up changing their mind, and we did end up meeting and having a relationship. But adoptees are not the only ones with loss in this equation, call it the adoption equation. Certainly birth parents have a lot of loss too. They lose the ability to raise their biological child, whether it's their choice or not, they still lose that connection to their child. And most adoptive parents, land on adoption for many reasons, but usually because of infertility. So the whole equation is surrounding loss of some sort and abandonment issues and attachment issues.
Absolutely. Yes. And trauma, that's a great point. And the fact that you did have the medical issue, sometimes trauma does get trapped in the body. I'm a firm believer in that, and is, a way of saying, hey, we have something we need to deal with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it makes me kind of curious. Like, was your body actually telling you this is really a thing for you? It's underlying. You really do want to know, like, start searching.
In retrospect, Cassie, I look back and I think absolutely. When you have twins, usually there's one that's a little sicklier or one that's a little healthier. I mean, we weighed 5 pounds, each of us. We were healthy infants. We were always right neck and neck with height and weight and growth patterns and all of that. But I had all these health issues. I had ear infections, my tonsils out. And then as a middle-aged woman, I had all these female issues. And they just kept percolating. And that's what led to the breast biopsy, and didn't actually end up having cancer, but that definitely runs in my family's bloodline. Anyway, I figured out who both my birth parents were. I figured out my story. I've got some new relatives that I'm very connected to. And all of that happened within about 5 years' time, and all the health issues disappeared.
Wow.
And the whole time, my sister never had any of those. So I like to tell her that I was the scapegoat for both of us, and I did all the work that we both benefited from. And yeah,
Yes.
so I really want to read that book, The Body Keeps the Score. I haven't read it yet,
Yes.
but
It's a great one.
I would really, really like to read it now, looking back in hindsight.
Yes, yes. You'd probably just like connect dots all over the place. Yes.
Sure.
I love it.
Sure.
Well, as I was reading through this, I think how brave, because it would be very challenging as an adopted child to think about the rejection, the possible rejection. If you reach out, if you search for your parents, because it was closed adoption. So, they didn't want to be contacted at some point. They chose, no, we're done, we're done. And that's okay. But I'm just curious, like, and I know you had the health thing, so that really kind of prompted it. But was that rejection piece kind of laying in the back of your mind? Like, there is a huge
Oh,
chance they're going to say
yes.
no.
Yes. And as a kid, the other piece was, when are they coming back for us? Are they going to come back? What would we do if they do come back and want us back? Here we are already in this, beautiful family where you have all this belonging and a whole new identity, really. So it's a really tenuous position to be in as a kid and not have information. I think, and closed adoption really was the only vehicle back then in the 1950s and 60s. My birth mother, when I did find her, was really angry because she was promised her privacy. And she felt like her privacy had been breached because
Mm,
she'd been promised that. I think the generation that my birth mom's from, she's now 91, they don't get the whole DNA thing. And certainly anybody that's placing a child for adoption now has got to be thinking in the back of their mind, no matter what, is this open adoption, is this closed adoption, there is a risk of being found.
yes.
So it's put adoption in a different place, the DNA. I think I have friends who have found out that one of their parents is not their biological parent as a result of DNA, sort of by accident. I think it's putting a lot of pressure on people to be honest with their families. They can't hide a secret, maybe a secret that they're afraid about,
Yes.
that they don't want to go back and confront, that's going to cause them distress, but they're having to face that. And so adoption's in a different place because of DNA. It would not have helped me to use it because the database wasn't built up at the time I was doing this in 2011. Also, knowing my birth relatives as I do, some of my cousins from my birth mom's side are on Ancestry and 23andMe. So I would have connected to them, but none of my father's kids, I would never have found my brother and sister with DNA analysis. So
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So, what was that first meeting like? I mean, you write about it in your book, so I know, but I would love for you to share because it can be intimidating. But to me, this is about encouraging people to take the difficult step to do the thing that is going to possibly be scary, to do that, and the outcome will be the outcome, but do the thing. Yes.
yeah, I'm going to lead into that with an observation from my social worker at Catholic Charities, who was really helping me at the time in this group that I was part of. And she said, you have to really look at this situation when you're making an outreach to a birth parent. You know you're coming, but they don't know they're coming. It is like walking into a movie that's half over. There's so much you don't know about these people and their situations. And while I knew that intellectually, it was exactly what happened. Neither my birth father or birth mother knew I was coming. They got a letter out in the mail right out of the blue, and they reacted like a lot of people would do out of fear. And then fear often manifests in anger. And they took it out on the intermediary, but also on my sister and I. And so it took a while for that anger to soften into curiosity about, wow, there must be something wrong with our birth daughters that they want medical history. Because that's what I was asking for in the beginning. I wasn't asking for contact. And it took my birth mom, well, the judge had to issue a new order, but it took her about 9 months from start to finish to have a relationship with my sister and I. And the essay that you're talking about, it's called The Happiest Moment, and it's in Belonging Matters. And I was at a lunch, the essay, I'm at a lunch with a friend of mine who asks me, what was the happiest moment in your life? And of course, at first you think, oh, well, the day I met my husband, the day I got married, holding my children in my arms after their birth. And I mean, certainly those were happy moments, but you expect them to be happy.
Right.
The unexpected happy moment was hearing my birth mom's voice on the phone for the very first time, because there had been a lifetime of waiting to hear her voice, and there had been all this rejection and chaos leading up to that point. So that was the happiest moment. And it's also a good question to ask at a dinner party and at Thanksgiving, to go around the table and say, what was your happiest moment? Because I think everybody would have a different reaction.
Absolutely. And was her voice at all what you thought it was going to be? Because you had the story of who they were and what had happened, and I would imagine there's a voice there.
Yeah, yes and no. I knew that she was a school teacher, so she had that school teacher, crispness, kind of almost matter of fact, but ordering kind of but it was also older. When I found her, she was in her late 70s. So she had an older woman's voice. And it took me aback because I would have liked to have known her as a younger woman.
Mhm.
And probably vice versa. She probably would say the same thing. So she's still alive and we're still in contact. So
Yes,
that's
91. Well, you have longevity.
yes.
That's awesome. Okay, so one of the things you talked about in the book was Mother's Day. And I love that you kind of differentiated and make a special time for your mother prior to Mother's Day, and then your mom, Mother's Day, and that you also labeled them different. Mother is your birth mother, and then mom is the mom who raised you. So you
Correct.
consider her mom. And I love that because that's how you identify with your mom. She's mom. And
And she gets Mother's Day. That is her day. And the day before Mother's Day is a nationally recognized day as Birth Mother's Day. And honestly, I recognize Mother's Day for both of them because my birth mom was like, sort of wishy-washy about it. But I also have another mother, and that was my mother-in-law, who my husband's mom, who was probably one of the most influential people in my life through this whole process. She was an impartial party. She was also a writer, and she was deeply curious and empathic with me over what was happening. And she didn't take sides between my birth mom and my adoptive mom, who wasn't happy that I was down this path of finding this other mother. But because I felt her support and her love, she was almost, besides my twin sister, she was my second phone call all the time when some big break came in the case. And then she'd say, and did you think about this? And did you think about that? And I hope you're writing this down. So she gets so much credit all the time for this writing journey that evolved from this crazy story that I didn't even know I was going to do until I had a breast biopsy. So that's something I would pass on to the listeners is that, even later in life, your life path can take this big swerve and then another swerve. And just to be open and go with it because sometimes it goes down a path that you are going to so welcome when you need it most. So, and that certainly has been the case with talking about adoption, talking about writing books. It's been a wonderful chapter now that I have adult children and grandchildren. So it's given me a purpose, a higher purpose.
yeah,
And my book Twice a Daughter, I wrote it because it's got crazy stuff happens, and I find a brother and a sister. Turns out that I knew my brother, but I didn't know he was my brother. He'd married the girl next door, literally. So it had all these synchronicities, and it evolved into such a crazy story that writing it was not the plan when I started off, but it certainly became the plan. And as I found out from other adoptees in my circle, most of my story was everybody else's story too.
mm,
Uh, Conflicted relationships with adoptive parents over tackling this, contact with birth relatives that didn't want to be found and didn't want to introduce you or tell their secret to their immediate family. So the book became bigger than me. And so many people that are my age that are from the closed adoption era are also writing their memoirs.
mm,
And we mutually support one another. It's wonderful to be in that community. I had no idea how much I would welcome being in this space of birth parents, adoptive parents, and other adoptees, just talking through this really complicated issue of who do you belong to? What's your identity? Who's your family? Of course, they're all our family. We don't have to draw a line in the sand and say, I belong more to this family than this family. I belong to both. Both of them make up who I am, and I don't have to choose. Sometimes we get put in the position where we have to choose. I'm grateful that my adoptive parents didn't say, it's us or them. You gotta,
Right.
and they didn't do that. But sometimes that does happen. And
Yes.
that's a terrible, terrible dilemma to be in.
Yeah, that goes back to the fear of, if I reach out, all of these things could happen. So I can see where it would be really almost terrifying to think about, okay, if I'm going to do this, there's a lot that could go on. You do mention that your mom was not super happy. Your adoptive mom was not super happy originally about you reaching out and kind of going into that. And I think I could totally relate to that because I have this beautiful bond with this child that is mine. And now here's this other mother who might steal her away. That would be my thought process. So how did your mom come to really kind of settle into that?
Well, because she didn't want me to do it, but and also didn't want to be part of it, we had kind of a rift that started. She didn't want to know anything about the search. She didn't want to know anything about my birth mother. And so I was on this parallel path with these two people. My birth mom welcomed contact with my adoptive mom. She had so much she wanted to say to her about, being a mother and being our mother and gratefulness and joy of surrounding that. But my mom was operating from fear and negativity. And so it was her coming around is an interesting part of the story. I call it the God wink moment. So this fact that I find this half brother and half sister, the half brother married the woman next door to our family lake cottage. We were passing in on the beach and not knowing we were related. And once my brother and I figured out, oh my gosh, you're married to her. I tell my mom and dad that story, and they're like, "Oh, well, let's all get together and have dinner. We have to have this celebration of that we're all related, and we didn't know we were related." That was the God wink moment that my brother and his relationship to our neighbor was what switched her around, realizing, no one's going to take my daughters away from me. They still belong to me. And now I can welcome all these people because I know them. So
Yes.
it was really the healing moment, was discovering our connection to him.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then talking about like taking on and kind of extending family, you've extended your family kind of exponentially through this search. You have lots of distant cousins and large families. So let's talk about what that's like and how do you balance that? Because holidays have got to be a little crazy.
Well, I have 4 children that are married and grandkids, so that has made holidays very complicated. But I have all these first cousins on my birth mom's side, and that is an interesting thing. My birth siblings and these first cousins are excited about getting to know, the sisters or the cousins that they didn't know they had. They have no baggage coming into the equation. They were completely accepting of my sister and I from the beginning. Birth father not. I never met him. He did not want to meet my sister and I. He was fine with my half brother and sister having a relationship with us, but he was completely hands off. I had a great dad growing up. So while I was hurt that he didn't even want to meet us, and I would have really liked to have set eyes on him, I didn't feel like I missed out because I had this great relationship with the dad that raised me. The
Mm-hmm.
conversation that surprised me the most, and I worried about this, were the siblings I grew up with, not my twin and not my brother that's adopted because he was in the equation, but the younger siblings. And they were happy for us. They said, you deserve to know all this information. I'm glad you found all these people and that the gaps are filled in your story. So they were really warm and loving. It was just my mom. It was my mom who was the one that made life difficult there for a while. When the book came out, the first book, Twice a Daughter, and there's some chapters in there that are difficult. She's portrayed honestly. I portray myself honestly. And I worried about it. I changed her name, as did I changed my birth mom's name. I worried how she was going to react to it. So before it even came out, she got a copy to read. And because we had come full circle in our relationship and things were fine, she said, and this was during COVID, so that was the other factor on top of it. She said, it's a really good book, and I think you wrote the story you wanted to tell. So an adult reaction. So that was her blessing. And she's come to events with me and sat in the front row and cheered. So we survived it. We survived a lot of crap.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure. So was it, I don't even know how to ask this. Was it awkward as you first met some of the new siblings? And because we haven't mentioned it, but both parents went on to have families and children of their own. And so you do have a rather large extended
Well,
family.
my birth mom never had any other kids.
Oh,
So
she didn't. Okay.
no, my twin sister and I are it, but she was one of 13.
Oh, wow.
So all of her siblings telling them the secret that I was this birth mom in the late 1950s was painful for her. And I've gotten to meet a lot of my aunts and uncles finally. It just took a while. It took her a while. And I think it took them a while. They're all from the same generation of marriage. Sex before marriage is wrong. If you do that, you're a sinner, and you're a bigger sinner if you get caught at it and find yourself pregnant. You are disowned. You need to go away and come back and act like nothing happened and work towards redemption. As a result, she was a single mom, a single person till she was 48. And then she married for the first time at that age. So it scarred her for a long time, her experience of being an unwed mom and my birth father not agreeing to marry her. So not
Yeah,
so
and
today, right? And not so today, people can decide whatever they want, freeze their eggs, have a baby when they want to, and much better for everybody.
absolutely. I think about the number of secrets, family secrets that just disappear when someone passes. Now we openly share everything. Everybody has their whole life on Instagram and TikTok and whatever, but such a different world for someone then. So I could see how that would be a little scary for her. Like, oh my gosh, I have to tell my whole family. This changes who they think I am. Yeah, that would be rough.
And her
So
peers too. So she lives in a senior center now. We visit her occasionally, but not very often. It's very uncomfortable for all of us. She doesn't know how to introduce us to the woman that lives next door. And she's been hurtful a couple of times by introducing us as friends visiting from Chicago as opposed to my daughters visiting from Chicago.
yeah,
And while I understand it intellectually, she's in this bubble of her peers that would judge her still
yeah.
as an unwed mother. It's nonetheless hurtful to me because I like who I am. I'm happy to be alive. I'm happy with my life. And so it's so foreign to be treated like that because my parents adored us. So it's a hard walk to walk.
hmm Yeah, that would be hard. A little brutal, maybe.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. Well, so you see her every so often and you have a fairly good connection with other siblings and cousins and family members. When you think about what you went through to finally get to a point where you do have these relationships, what words of wisdom do you have for another adoptee or even the adoptive parents or the parent who's like giving the child a chance in another family? what would you say to all of them? Because it would be difficult on all sides. Every part of this is not an easy decision for the person giving up the child. I think the adoptive parents would want to protect and, keep the child from harm. But then there's the curiosity that is naturally going to come up if you're adopted. What words of wisdom do you have for all parties?
Well, the two things. Read. There's so many great books out there. This topic is always in the news. My favorite book is Ann Fessler's book called The Girls That Went Away. It's about birth mothers since 1950s. It's very educational. There's been a new book that came out this year that's also very helpful. It's called Relinquished, and it basically follows, it's research oriented. And the woman that wrote it's not even in the adoption world, but it follows birth mothers in 10-year increments and talks about their experiences and why, an open adoption, the relationships worked, why they didn't work. Closed adoption is dealt with in Ann Fessler's book. So read something and educate yourself about all the points of view, because it's so easy to sit back and offer what you think into a situation that you have no firsthand knowledge. That's the most hurtful thing. One of the things that I benefited from, Catholic Charities has a post-adoption support group that I got involved in very early on. Those three members of the triad, adoptive parents, birth parents, and adoptees, we were all in rooms together hearing about the personal pain and struggles of where they were. And it was formative for me to have empathy for my birth mom. I really did come out of that experiencing thinking, well, yeah, I have it bad, right? I was robbed of my identity for so long, but how hard for her. So I do have empathy for all sides. I think one of the most hurtful conversations to me was with a friend, personal friend. I was going through this process of trying to get my medical history, and knowing that that was why I was doing it, she said, well, don't you feel disloyal to your adoptive parents? I was dumbfounded. I looked at her. She is my friend, and she had this opinion. She wasn't even looking at my side of needing this information. She was looking at me as disloyal. And I think that that's something that adoptees do worry about. We don't want to be disloyal to the family that has raised us and loved us in most cases. And it's this balancing act between, I need to know who I am, but I also have this, connection to this, belonging to this family. So back to your point, listen to all points of view, educate yourself, and maybe not offer an opinion if it's going to be hurtful. Because if you're not touched by adoption personally, you don't get how there's a lot of sharp edges.
Yeah, I do. I think about that, like just thinking about each person there's a whole different story and things that go with that process for each person involved. It's a lot. Yeah. So again, kudos to you, which kind of leads me to the struggle piece. Like, I always love the story that someone goes through something challenging, different, that really pushes them, and that almost always, I'm going to say 99.9% of the time, leads that person to help others.
Mm-hmm.
How have you found yourself connected or doing something that helps someone else that might be going through this process where you never would have before you started this search?
I will say hands down, podcasts and book clubs, public discussions about my story have led to private conversations, emails, exchanges with people that they say, you iterated what's in my heart and in my head and validated my own experience. And that means so much. I was on a I'm a big journaler. I journaled all through teenagerhood, and I still do. But I was on the International of Journal Writers. It was like a webinar, and it was at 6 p.m. at night, and there was a woman on the call. She was from Australia, so she was at 6 a.m. She'd gotten up early to get on this show, and I think I write an essay about it that's in Belonging Matters. And she was a birth mom. And I don't know how she heard the story, but she had read my first book, Twice a Daughter, and the empathy that I show in that book towards my birth mom. She said, I came away from reading the book determined to find a support group. I didn't even know, and this broke my heart. I didn't know that there was a group like that for someone like me. So she needed to find a group that made her feel better about herself and her decisions. So you don't know. I mean, you just don't know your words, who will be touched by this podcast and the message to go ahead and try the search, but know that these are the pitfalls that could happen. You don't know, but it is our obligation, I think, to share our story, and wherever it lands, hopefully it lands and is fertilized and flourishes.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest message is you're not alone. There is someone else going through or has been through what you're currently in. And so many people just feel like they're the only one, or this is only happening to me. And I think, oh my gosh, no, that's why I love telling these stories, because there's someone who's going to hear this and say, oh my gosh, let me get that book, or let me check out this group, or let me search and see what other support groups are there for me. Yes.
There are certainly a lot of great support groups that you can get involved on Facebook, online, some amazing groups that deal with adoptees, adoptive parents, and birth parents. There's one called the NAAP United, and it's everybody from the adoption constellation. They have meetings and support groups, and it's a fabulous organization, but there's lots of those now. Adoption Mosaic is another group, and they're easy to find, whereas we didn't have those at our fingertips about 10 years ago. So anybody that's listening, there are so many avenues to get in touch with people that can help you figure out the information you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely believe
and
that.
Some stuff that you don't want to know, you're gonna find that too.
Yeah, be prepared, right?
Yeah, be prepared.
There's always good and bad. Well, what do you think this adoption journey, or how do you think this adoption journey has changed your life?
Well, certainly telling the story is heartwarming to me because I get to meet so many people that want to hear it. But the writing journey has been really, really, really good for me. I've finished both of these two books. I have another book coming out next year that is the story of what it was like to grow up in this big, crazy Irish family that I was involved in and all the things that happened. So I continue to write. Sometimes I write silly stuff. I think even if you're just a journaler, you don't have to per se write published pieces. I think you find out what you think when you put the pen to a pad of paper.
Yes.
You don't have to show it to anybody, but sometimes you would be so surprised what comes out, and you're just like, wow, where did that come from? I didn't even know I was thinking about that. It wasn't a conscious thought. So that would be the other suggestion I have to listeners is, pick up a little journal. Try it. Maybe it's a gratitude journal, maybe it's a joy journal, maybe it's some thoughts about what happened to you as a kid. And I think the personal growth that comes from writing that out is really helpful to us at this point in our lives.
I'm a huge fan of journaling. I didn't really. I found old diaries when I was a kid, and they were like, hit and miss days and that kind of thing. And didn't really connect with journaling until I was personally kind of on a healing journey. I was like, okay, why does this stuff keep happening to me? And then I go, oh, common denominator, me. So maybe, maybe I should look at all of this. And once I started journaling, exactly what you said, it's so insightful because you will go, "Oh, I had no idea that was a thing. Like that's coming out. So I should be paying attention to this." And it brings a different kind of awareness to different situations to your life. Yeah, I found it so beneficial. And writing for you, like, have you found that a little like cathartic?
Yes, I think that ability to step outside of ourselves, writing is creative. I also like to sew, and that's the same kind of thing. You're taking pieces and putting them together and seeing what they look like all together. And now my twin sister can't stand writing. She says it just feels like homework to me. And I don't see it that way. It feels like homework sort of, but it feels like doing Sudoku or a crossword puzzle to me. It's taking the right pieces and putting them in the right order to send a message or to make a point. So I like that part of it, the problem solving part of it.
Yes, yes. I'm a firm believer in, for me, I have to have some sort of creative outlet. And that's why I do the podcast, because it engages me with other people. It gets me thinking about something I may not have ever thought about or dug deeper into. Find it absolutely fascinating. And I also love to quilt, and it's about the puzzle, putting all the pieces together. And yeah, so I love
And
it.
having this beautiful thing at the end.
Yes, yes, it's wonderful. Well, how can people connect with you? Buy your book? How do we get our hands on a copy of all your books? Because you have a new one coming out,
Right.
and you've written two. So
I have a website. It's juliemcgueauthor.com. So the books, all the information about me and everything I write is on that website. And both books are available wherever books are sold. There's the big A word, but there's also Barnes and Noble and another organization called bookshop.org, which I love to plug. You can order your whatever book you want from bookshop.org, and credit goes to your local bookstore.
oh, that's great.
So
Yes, I like that. And libraries are always good too.
yes, they are. And a lot of libraries carry my books because the American Library Association is really good about supporting authors and purchasing ebooks too.
Yes, that's great. I love that. I love a good audiobook because I can listen to it in my car. I'm staying with the story the whole time. I don't have to put it down, really, is how I look at it.
Yeah.
But there's something about turning pages in an actual book too that is just, I don't know. You can't, I have
Sometimes
to have
it's fun
books.
to have both. It's
Yeah.
fun to have both. So my first book, Twice a Daughter, I did not do the voice on that one. It was an actress. But the second book, Belonging Matters, it is my voice. So
And I think there's something to that too. As a listener, I like having the author's voice because I feel more connected to the story because they're telling it. So
yeah.
I think it's great that you.
It's a lot of work though. Oh my God.
I'll bet. Yes. Just doing this is a lot of work. So I can't imagine a whole book. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, Julie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And hopefully someone out there hears it and it touches and makes them want to, research a little bit more about adoption and something they're
not to make a bad pun, but thanks for being curious about adoption and showcasing it on your podcast today.
Yes, absolutely. And on that note, we'll say farewell, stay safe, and stay curious, my friends.
There's new music to the Curiosity Junkie podcast. It was created by Jonathan Adams, aka Sonic Yogi. For more relaxing music from Sonic Yogi, check out sonicyogi.com.